The magnetic field is part of creation, it's part of design, and it's important to us.
To me, magnetism, the Earth's magnetism especially, is an example of God putting protection around us, whether or not we're even aware of it.
Magnetic fields, particularly Earth's, but also the other planets of the solar system, are strong indications that the solar system's thousands of years old, not millions or billions.
The Earth's magnetic field reversed its direction 50 to 100 times during the year of the Genesis flood.
There's so much we can learn about the nature of God from the laws of physics.
Colossians 1:16 says about Jesus, "For by him all things are created, both in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible." One of his invisible handiworks is a mysterious force that's all around us, magnetism. And many of our planets in our solar system have strong magnetic fields, including Earth. Why has God designed our world with this amazing force?
Well, the Earth's magnetic field, that's an interesting phenomena. It surrounds the Earth, and we've all seen how it pulls on a compass needle.
Magnetism is one of those things that it's easy to underappreciate. The Earth's magnetic field, for example, is something that we can't sense with our senses, yet it passes through our bodies without us even knowing.
We don't really understand the origin of the Earth's magnetism. Apparently, down in the outer core of the Earth, which is liquid, where we've never been, there is a circulating current. It would be billions of amperes, because this is how you make magnetism. You have to have a circulating electrical current. This is what we do with motors and generators. And this is strong enough then that it surrounds the whole planet. But again, the interior of the Earth is somewhat of a mystery. It's all second guessing, and we may have some surprises down there. The magnetic field is part of creation, it's part of design, and it's important to us. The magnetic field of the Earth is just one of the valuable shields that God has placed around the world to protect us.
Cosmic rays, radiation from the sun, other things would be very harmful to life on Earth. But our magnetic field acts as a shield and diverts a lot of that away from us.
In this case, it's the solar wind, which is not a wind that can ripple a flag. It's fragments of atoms that come our way. They're boiled off the sun, they come here at high speed, and they could hit us and damage our tissues. But the solar wind radiation, on the way through the magnetic field of the Earth, it gets deflected, it gets turned aside. There's an interesting force involved there. In fact, this solar radiation material begins to go around in circles high in the sky. It's called the Van Allen radiation belt. It kind of surrounds the whole Earth, several hundred miles high. The astronauts, when they went to the moon, had to move through that belt, and there was some danger or some fear there, but they weren't in there for that long, and we always have to be careful of radiation. But anyway, that's what's happening, and so we're protected from the solar wind. And finally, with that kind of circular type motion that the solar wind has, it kind of spirals and moves toward both poles of the Earth, and finally does come down and hit the ground. And on the way to the ground, it collides with atmospheric atoms and lights up. And we can see it. This is the aurora, or the northern and southern lights. And if you get a chance to see that, that's just a good reminder that the Earth's magnetic field is operating and it's protecting us and kind of shunting this radiation way up to these out-of-the-way places where there are no people, where there's no hazard involved at all.
To me, magnetism, the Earth's magnetism especially, is an example of God putting protection around us, whether or not we're even aware of it.
The magnetic field, the shielding effect, is just one of multiple safety mechanisms that God's put in place. And I'm sure that there are other shields in place that we don't even know of yet, because as time goes by, we find them one after another. This Earth was well prepared for us.
So the Earth's magnetic field shows God's loving kindness in providing a safe place for us to live. Could the magnetic field also provide us clues about how long ago the Earth was created?
Over the last 100 years, we have noticed that the Earth's magnetic field is diminishing. It's gone down 6%, 10%, which is a rather large number in geologic deep time type views.
It's been measured. We just can measure the strength of the magnetic field all over the Earth from many different observation points and often from satellites, and just measure the strength now and wait 10 years and measure it later and it's less. And that's been going on since the 1830s.
Our suggestion as creationists is that maybe this will continue, and maybe this shows that the magnetic field was started with some particular strong value and has just been going away ever since and will eventually disappear.
Basically, magnetic fields are caused by electrical current. In fact, you can build your own magnet. You take a coil of wire and wrap it around many times, touch the two ends to a battery and have current flowing through it. You will make a little electromagnet.
Any spinning electric charge has a magnetic field, so electrons in atoms and electrons spinning and electrons going around the atom make a magnetic field, and then the spinning protons in the atomic nucleus make a magnetic field. Any electric charge that moves makes a magnetic field.
We think that the currents inside Earth's core, for example, drive its magnetic field. So you have that electrical current wrapping around there, but that current encounters resistance. It runs down with time. Batteries run down with time, and magnetic fields naturally decay. They would decay exponentially based on that particular model, and from the observations we've done, that appears to be the case. Earth's magnetic field appears to be decaying exponentially.
I have an article in the Creation Research Society Quarterly that actually tracks this change much more accurately than we've been able to track it before. I used a new set of data on it, and it's very precise. And the field, the main part of the Earth's field, it's called the dipole, the two poles, north and south pole part. That part is decaying with a half-life of about 1,100 years, give or take 10 years. It's decaying very rapidly, so every 1,100 years, going back, it's lost quite a bit of strength. And the other parts of the Earth's magnetic field are losing energy also. So the field has some complicated minor parts, and those parts are also losing energy rapidly.
The decay of the Earth's magnetic field, if it continues at its current depletion, could be gone in about 1,000 years. Now that may sound like a long time, but it's not in geologic terms. And if the Earth's magnetic field disappears, then here comes the solar wind, and it could be a dangerous time on the Earth. Now, some have taken that as maybe a sign of the end times, that things can't continue. I'm not so sure about that. If time would continue to go by, maybe scientists could come up with some sort of artificial protection. But at any rate, geophysicists especially are closely watching the Earth's magnetic field, saying, what's going on here? It seems to be changing much more rapidly than everything else in geology, so it may be an indication of not all that long ago creation, and maybe a culmination of things as well.
It's a big concern to the people who want the Earth to be billions of years old, because decay like that at that rate could not have gone on for more than thousands of years.
Because if you run an exponential decay backward, it gets huge fast. And so it just can't be millions, let alone billions of years old. It'd rip your iron right out of your blood. I mean, that's how strong it would be. So it would prevent life from ever having existed, really. So magnetic fields, particularly Earth's, but also the other planets of the solar system, are strong indications that the solar system's thousands of years old, not millions or billions.
The revelation that the Earth's magnetic field is decaying is a real blow to the idea of an ancient Earth. Also, when we study the chronologies of the Bible, the Earth can only be thousands of years old, which is consistent with the age of the magnetic field. Secular scientists have had a hard time getting around this fact and cannot accept the idea that the magnetic field is consistent with the age of the young Earth.
Magnetism is interesting because it shows up in various places in the solar system where the secular model says it shouldn't be. In order to have a magnetic field last for the billions of years required by the model, then the primary explanation for this is a dynamo.
A dynamo is the secular rescuing device to try and save the billions of years age from all this evidence to the contrary. It's sort of like an alternator in your car. You can take mechanical energy and turn it into electrical energy. There's no doubt the alternator in your car does that very thing, but that requires some fairly specific circumstances to do that. It doesn't just happen by itself randomly. The alternator in your car is a specially designed device, and there isn't such a device in the Earth as far as we know, and therefore there's no reason to expect that the Earth's natural motions would somehow generate a very strong magnetic field or replenish Earth's magnetic field over time. The conditions don't exist within Earth, at least not today.
Started back in 1919. Sir Joseph Larmor outlined the first one. And for nearly a century, they've been trying to make dynamo theories work, to figure out how events in the cores of planets can maintain the magnetic fields for billions of years. But those theories haven't worked very well, so the predictions weren't really too good.
And those same magnetic dynamo models, they said, well, that's the same for the other planets of the solar system, Uranus and Neptune. But those dynamo models required that the magnetic axis be aligned with the rotation axis, or at least pretty close to it. And what we find, for example, with the planet Uranus is it's tilted like that, it's not even close. And likewise with Neptune, the magnetic axis is very tilted from the rotation axis, contrary to the expectations of the dynamo models. And so the simplest explanation is the reason those magnetic fields are still there is because they've only been decaying for about 6,000 years. The
dynamo theories have still not arrived. They still reach a point where it becomes only hand-waving. And in fact, it looks like just using the equations of the theory itself, I delved into them, and using those equations, it looks like the Earth cannot have a dynamo running in it. And so that presently, the only thing that can be accounting for the decay is the electrical resistance of the current going around in the Earth's core, wearing it away.
Dynamos are usually presented as being the straightforward understanding of how a planet can produce a magnetic field. But having worked with electromagnetism as part of my education and career, it can get a lot more complicated in physical practice versus theory. As an example, you can make an electrical transformer just by taking a little rectangular piece of metal and taking a wire, wrapping it around this way, another wire wrapping around this way, and you can transform the current voltage that comes in this side to a different set of current voltage coming out the other side. And you're doing that through electromagnetism. You're transforming one field to the other until you get the current and voltage you want coming out of it. Even a system this simple, I mean, there's no moving parts, it's just a piece of metal with wire wrapped around it. Even this incurs losses. As things travel through, there's called eddy currents swirling around inside the metal. So you're losing energy as you're transforming it through this. And again, this is a very simple system. Translate this to a dynamo inside of a planet where you have currents inside of liquid metal all swirling around and fluid dynamics and a lot of other things. The picture gets really complicated really fast. And it's very difficult to explain how you can sustain these things over billions of years.
The idea of a dynamo is unproven in explaining how the Earth's magnetic field could last 4.5 billion years. Yet the evidence of a decaying field is consistent with the biblical age for the Earth. The exciting thing is that the magnetic field may also contain other clues about the biblical account.
The rock layers on land and in the ocean show that the Earth's magnetic field reversed its direction 50 to 100 times during the year of the Genesis flood. So that means a reversal every few days or so. And that means a reversal of the electric current in the Earth's core. When a rock cools down, it records this reversal.
When rocks form, igneous rocks, the kind that form from magma, they trap and record what the magnetic field is like as they harden, and then that becomes a permanent record. There's little magnets inside rocks, microscopic, and you can measure how they're pointing.
What's left over in a rock, say, that has magnetite in it, magnetic oxide in it, or iron oxide. When the rock forms, the magnetite grains in it lock in the direction and the strength of the magnetic field. They get magnetized by whatever magnetic field exists on the Earth at that time that the rock is cooling. And when it cools through a certain temperature, called the Curie temperature, it locks in the information about the direction and the strength of the field. And that's how we know from just looking at rocks that the Earth's magnetic field was reversed in times past while those flood rocks, the fossil rocks and others, were being laid down.
Igneous rocks that were forming during the year-long flood show that the magnetic field of the Earth was kind of ricocheting. It was going north, it was going south, going back north again, as if the whole Earth's interior was kind of thrown out of equilibrium, and whatever causes that magnetic field inside the Earth, it was flip-flopping, changing around, and then of course it settled down during our own era again, along with this slow decrease that we're measuring.
We think that during the flood year, the magnetic field of the Earth flipped back and forth, perhaps multiple times, due to the motion of the plates, and that would disturb the current in Earth's core. And so you get rapid reversals, and they'd be temporary. In terms of the field strength, it's just going to flip it back and forth. In terms of the field's energy, it's going to reduce it even faster. So we think in terms of the total energy, that just made it even worse.
Well, I have a theory about that. It was in 1986 International Conference on Creationism, and then I developed it in the 1990 International Conference on Creationism. But what would happen is that there would be rapid overturning of the fluid in the core due to my friend John Baumgartner's catastrophic plate tectonics, bringing cold plates in contact with the hot core. This produces lots of roiling and boiling. And the electrically conducting fluid in the core, it's mostly molten iron. By the way, the iron's too hot to be magnetic, but that conducting fluid would carry magnetic lines of force along with them and carry more upward than downward. And this process of pushing up magnetic lines of force would generate new lines of magnetic force that are in the other direction. This overturning, this catastrophe that must have happened in the Earth's core produced rapid reversals during the time that the Genesis flood was going on the Earth's surface.
These rocks on the ocean floor, now when rocks form, when you had volcanic type rocks, when they harden, they tend to align with the Earth's magnetic field at the time they form. And so we find that if you look in these ocean layers and you go away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, for example, you'll find alternating layers as if it's flipped back and forth the further away you get. It's rather remarkable, really, like these sort of magnetic stripes. And so that suggests that the magnetic field flipped many times as the ocean floor was spreading. And now, of course, the secularists, they would actually agree with that. They would just say the spreading happened slowly over millions of years. Well, actually, the interesting thing is, if you go down, you'll also find that it flips going down. And the only way that can happen is if it happens quickly. Well, the top layer freezes first, and then the layer below it, and then the layer below it. And so the Earth's magnetic field has a chance to flip, you see, between when this layer freezes and when that layer freezes. The bottom line is, if it were slow, you would expect it to be the same all the way down. If it happens fast, you'd find it flipping as you go down, and we find it flipping as you go down. And so that confirms that not only did the ocean floor spreading happen quickly, but Earth's magnetic field must have flipped quickly as well during the flood year.
A couple of experts in that field, world-class paleomagnetism experts, they're called, Robert Coe and Michel Prévost, documented a change, very rapid change, from the inside to an outside of a lava flow that was fairly thin in Steens Mountain, Oregon. And during the time that the rock was cooling, the field changed its direction by nearly 60 degrees. And they calculate that that cooling could take no longer than a few weeks, and it probably only took a few days. Very rapid changes in the direction of the Earth's magnetic field are recorded.
This idea that the Earth's magnetic field could change poles, that's a possibility. We see that happening on the sun. The sun's north-south poles change. Of course, we don't understand the sun's magnetism either.
The moon probably reversed its magnetic field. There's evidence that Mars did when it had a strong magnetic field. It's got magnetic stripes, just like the Earth's oceans do. which probably are also due to reversals of the Earth's magnetic field.
So far, we've learned about two powerful ways the Earth's magnetic field is consistent with the scriptural account: the short age due to the decaying field, and reversals explained by the worldwide flood. But what if the biblical worldview allowed for creation scientists to accurately predict the strength of magnetic fields in planets elsewhere in our solar system?
Every astronomical body seems to have had a magnetic field to begin with. The why is, I don't know, but I'm guessing God put it in as a clue as to how He made those bodies and how long it's been since He made those bodies. I went back and looked at Genesis chapter 1, and right there it says, the Spirit of God was moving on the face of the waters, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And so looks like first He created water, and then He changed that water to what we now see. I was looking for a way to explain the magnetic fields of planets. You know, we know that it's due to an electric current circulating in the cores of planets, and that current is running down and decaying, getting weaker. But how did God start it? It looks like at creation He did something to start up magnetic fields in every astronomical body that we know of. I was looking for how He did that. And if He formed it of water, plain old liquid, ordinary water molecules, then it just hit me one day that maybe one way He could have done that is by just lining up the hydrogen nuclei of each water molecule. There's about 1 with 50 zeros after it numbers of those nuclei in a ball of water that's the mass of the Earth. So there are a lot of these little nuclei, and they're little spinning balls of charge, and physicists know exactly how much magnetic field a proton generates by spinning. So if all the protons were spinning in the same direction, they would produce a certain size magnetic field. And lo and behold, it turned out that it was the right amount of magnetic field to account for 6,000 years worth of events and decay in the Earth's field to get us to today's level. And that was startling, because physicists usually, when they get a wild idea like that, it's usually many orders of magnitude off. So physicists have wastebaskets just filled with balled up pieces of paper with what seemed to be brilliant ideas that, were destroyed by the first contact with some real numbers. But this fit. I published on the creation of the Earth's magnetic field in 1983, Creation Research Society Quarterly, and I said, then what about the rest of the solar system? Because we've explored the solar system some, and we're continuing to explore it, and they're measuring magnetic fields, a lot of these bodies, and former magnetic fields on some of them, like the moon.
Magnetism shows up several places in the solar system where the secular model says it shouldn't. The secular model makes certain predictions about what characteristics various planets will have depending on their size and so on. And in several cases we see objects that are small enough that they should have cooled off billions of years ago, if they were actually billions of years old. Had they cooled off for various reasons, that makes it impossible for them to have a magnetic field today.
Would the theory explain those magnetic fields? It did. So I then went out on a limb in a publication in 1984, Creation Research Society Quarterly, and I said, if this theory is right, then some places that spacecraft haven't yet visited should show certain things. And one of the predictions was the strength of the field at the planets Uranus and Neptune. And when Voyager went by those planets, it got that degree of strength. And for Uranus, at least, the other side hadn't had a good prediction at all, and they were thinking it wouldn't have any field to speak of, and it turned out they were wrong. So then other planets like Mercury, my theory was saying, well, we knew it had a small field, and my theory was saying, well, it was once a large field, so it must be decaying rapidly. over 6,000 years. In a few decades, we should be able to see the decrease. And it turns out that Mercury's field has decreased about 8% in the last 36 years between two visits by spacecraft. And moreover, Mercury's magnetic crust, the North Pole, is strongly magnetized. Points to the field being at least 10 times stronger in the past than it is now. So that was also some of the predictions I made. Similar prediction for Mars. Anyhow, I had a lot of fun with this. I made about 6 specific predictions, and they've now all been validated, which simply means that the basis of the theory is right. The basis was water origin as creation, as God said in the scriptures, and a short time, about 6,000 years since that creation.
But we see Mercury has a magnetic field, the moon has evidence of magnetism, Ganymede, one of the moons of Jupiter, has a magnetic field. There are several places where the secular model says these objects are old, they can't have magnetic fields, but they do have fields. That would seem to imply that they aren't actually as old as the secular model says.
It was either sort of hand-waving sort of predictions and guesses with no firm figures behind them, or they were seriously wrong. Like, one of the real puzzles is how the moon once had a magnetic field. It rotates very slowly. It has a very tiny core, yet many of the rocks on it that the astronauts brought back were magnetized by a strong field in the past. So my theory says, well, this tiny little core still had a magnetic field, but it decayed very fast because it was tiny. Mercury was another case of that. They predicted first, back before 1974, before a spacecraft visited it, they predicted Mercury would have no magnetic field because it rotates very slowly. It's 88 times slower than the Earth. So they figured it should have no magnetic field. And when the spacecraft went by in 74 and 75, it showed that Mercury has a field about 1% of our field, which is still quite significant compared to 0. They fell on their face on that. So they've fallen on their face on Mercury, the Moon, and Mars, and haven't done too well with the others. So there weren't any really good predictions.
Well, this evidence doesn't fit with the secular model. It fits well with the biblical model, even allowing accurate scientific predictions. But can the study of magnetism and the laws of physics go further to teach us something about God Himself?
There's so much we can learn about the nature of God from the laws of physics, and I'm not sure that we've only scratched the surface on some of these things. The systematic nature of these laws of magnetism and so on, and the fact that they're related, the fact that they're all connected. A universe that's one in one sense and many in another, we've always argued that that's evidence of the Trinity, the fact that God is one in one sense and more than one in another sense. And so, for example, electromagnetism, on the one hand, electric fields and magnetic fields are two totally different things. But then, as we've discovered more about physics, you find, well, actually, the magnetic fields create the electric fields, which create the magnetic fields, which create the electric fields, and so on. It goes back and forth. And we find, and Einstein and others helped unify those forces. Really, those are two sides of the same coin. They're two different manifestations of the same electromagnetic force. And so that's another example of the one and the many. It's sort of an example of the Trinity. Well, at least it's a two in one. It's more than one, and there are things that manifest that are types of a Trinity. Space itself being three in terms of dimensions, and yet it's one space. And time being, well, three in terms of past, present, future in terms of our experience, but it's one dimension. And you've got space, time, and matter. Those make the universe, and yet it's sort of a three in one. So there are lots of things like that that demonstrate one and yet more than one. And I would argue that the secular worldview can't account for that. How you can have something, one in one sense and more than one in another sense, and how do those things tie into each other? How do they connect? In the Christian worldview, they all connect because they're established in the mind of God.
Romans 1:20 says that, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And that's why creation astronomers continue to research magnetism in the universe. As they do, we discover more about God and His amazing creation. It confirms the fact that the heavens declare the glory of God.